Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from RAU'S IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of RAU'S IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates.
Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified. The what, why and how of the newspaper analysis from a civil service examinations perspective. Today, we are going to discuss The Hindu Daily edition dated 27th August 2022. The topics which are to be discussed have been displayed on your screen and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. So now let us begin our first topic. This topic reads, Supreme Court raises the Karnataka iron ore mining ceiling limit. This topic has appeared at page number 5 and as you can see is in relation to the iron ore mining in India. Same is the context of this very topic. In certain districts of Karnataka like Bellary, Chitradurg and Tumakuru, Supreme Court has said that the ceiling limits, the upper limits which were there in the iron ore mining sector will be raised. This is basically done in order to ensure a balance between the ecological conservation as well as economic development. As far as the syllabus is concerned, this topic falls under the General Studies Paper 1 section of Geography. The micro section deals with the distribution of key natural resources across the world, including the South Asia as well as the Indian subcontinent. And in this very line, in today's session we are going to discuss the distribution of iron ore in India as well as the world. In the later half of this session, we will also discuss the environmental concerns which are associated with the iron ore mining. So as you can see here in this India's map, there are certain districts or certain regions which are predominantly associated with the iron ore mining. These names must be remembered because these names can be asked as it is in your prelims paper. Moreover, if it comes to the mains examination, you can have a reasoned account of the spatial distribution of the iron ore mining in India, and in association with it, you can also discuss the locational factors which affect the distribution of iron and steel industry in India. So let us see certain regions. First is the East Singhbhum area of Jharkhand, Keonjhar in Odisha, Durg in Chhattisgarh, Guntur and Ongole in Andhra Pradesh, Bellary, Chikmagalur in Karnataka, and there are certain iron ore mines in Goa as well. The important names in this one is the Durg which lies in Chhattisgarh and there is Chitradurg which lies in Karnataka as we have seen in the context. In Karnataka we have Bellary, Chitradurg as well as Tumakuru. So these are the certain iron ore mines in India. Now let us discuss this in the context of the global distribution. The red spots over here show you the distribution of iron ore mines. For example, they are in the regions of Russia. They are also found in the Ural regions as well as the Ruhr region of Germany. They are present in the Scandinavian peninsula. We all know they are in India also. In China, they are present in the Manchurian plains. In Africa, they are predominantly present on the western side in Brazil, as well as they are also present in the North American continent in both the countries, that is Canada as well as US. They are also present in the Australia as well as South Africa. When it comes to the production, India is among the top 5 countries. When it comes to the export, India is amongst the top 5 countries. So this is basically the distribution of the iron ore deposits in India and the world. Now we shall discuss certain environmental concerns associated with the iron ore mining. First of all, you must understand that what are those areas or what are the geological conditions in which the iron ores will be formed. They are predominantly found in the igneous rocks as well as metamorphic rocks, because whenever there is an upwelling of the molten material, that is lava, and it comes out in the form of magma, it will be solidified and crystallized. In the volcanic rocks as well as in the metamorphic rocks, there we can find certain iron ore deposits. These deposits can be found on the surface as well as at certain depth below the surface also. So obviously in India, the peninsular region is more associated with the iron ore because in peninsula only we have the formation of Deccan traps, we have the presence of volcanic as well as metamorphic rocks. So that is why the iron ores will be found in the old geological rock systems. This is true for India as well as for the world. Now let us assume that this is that particular area where the iron ore mining is taking place. So the first concern which comes here is directly the rock destabilization, because whenever we will dig holes because of mining in this area, we will have fracturing of these rocks, we will have certain blastings in these areas. So all this will lead to the rock destabilization, which in turn can trigger minor earthquakes. Now let us move towards our second concern. There is one important input which is required in almost all the mining process, and that is basically the water. So whenever we use water into these mines, there is always a leaching associated with it, and the water which either percolates beneath the ground surface or whether it forms the part of the surface runoff. In both of these situations, there is an issue of acid drainage. Acid drainage is basically when the water carries with itself certain contaminants, heavy metal pollutants to the nearby areas. The third concern is that as we have seen, this pollutant or this polluted water, because it's going beneath the ground surface, so obviously it will lead to the groundwater contamination. Now, because of the increased presence of the humans, vehicles, technology, etc. on this particular area, there are high chances of increased soil erosion and desertification. Further, because we have discussed that water is moving along with itself certain pollutants, and those pollutants can be any, for example, let's take manganese or magnesium, etc. These pollutants enter into the river streams, these pollutants enter into the oceans or seas nearby, which are then taken up by certain species, let's say birds or fishes, and therefore it further leads to the problem of bioaccumulation as well as biomagnification. And both of these phenomena have the potential to disrupt the entire food web. And last but not the least, we can imagine the pollutants in the atmosphere or the gases which are released from this mining. And that is why the last concern is the air pollution. And that is why the environmental concerns associated with the iron ore mining, or for that matter almost every mining, is that it affects or it negatively affects the air, water as well as the ground systems. That is, all the three spheres of the biospheres are negatively impacted by the iron ore mining. But on the other hand, we also know that this mining forms the base of certain heavy industries, which in turn provide employment, which in turn lead to regional development, help us to increase our exports, reduce our current account deficits, and that is why it becomes a very tricky question to ensure a balance between the economic development as well as ecological conservation. If we go to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, there the goals are also associated with the ecology as well as the goals are also associated with the economic aspect. So that is why in order to ensure this particular balance, in this particular case, the Supreme Court has raised the ceiling limit of the iron ore mining in certain districts of Karnataka. Our next topic has appeared at page number 6 in the editorial section, and this topic is in relation to the manual scavenging. The latest context of this very topic is the recent deaths which have been occurred in the sewer lines which were being cleaned through the manual processes. Now, the problem of manual scavenging is very much prevalent in today's modern India, where we claim to have one of the most fastest growing economy as well as largest democracy, where we feel so proud to have a constitution and the constitutional bodies which are tasked to preserve and protect the rights of Indian citizens. Despite all the advances in economy, technology, and at the societal level, still there are certain social issues which are still prevalent in our country, and manual scavenging is one of those issues. And that is why this topic regularly appears in newspapers and is very much relevant for you people in the UPSC mains examination. because as far as the UPSC scheme of syllabus is concerned, this topic falls under the General Studies Paper 2 mains under the section of Social Justice. So first of all, we will look at the existing legal safeguards in India. Now before discussing all these things, first thing which I want to discuss with you people is that manual scavenging is not just an economic activity, rather it has a deep social roots. Now, what are those social roots? These social roots are somehow linked to the caste based discriminations, which is still prevalent and rampant in our society, because almost all the manual scavengers which exist today in India belong to the so called low caste people. And it is believed that these scavenging activities, cleaning of the sewers, cleaning of the toilets, all these activities are to be done only by the Dalit section, and even among the Dalit section, the lowermost subcaste of the Dalit group, which we generally called as untouchables. So that is why this manual scavenging is not just an economic activity, rather, it also has the social connotation. And that is why there are several acts, for example, Protection of Civil Rights Act as well as the Prevention of Atrocities Act against scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Now, both these acts specifically deal with the rights of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe population. That is why you might think that what do these acts have to do with manual scavenging? But the point is that manual scavenging activity is also restricted to these social groups. And that is why there is a huge intermingling, overlapping of social as well as economic dimensions. So that is why the first legal safeguard which was enacted by our parliament was the Protection of Civil Rights in 1955. So, obviously, as the name is suggesting, this act was aimed to protect the civil rights of the members belonging to the scheduled caste community, and that was done in order to remove the untouchability as enshrined in our constitution in Article 17. So, to fulfill the objective of Article 17, this act was passed. Second important legal safeguard is Prevention of Atrocities Act against Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes, passed in 1989. Now, what happened was that protection of the civil rights specifically dealt with the untouchability. Now, the problem was that there were several actions which were committed by the people of other caste against the lower caste people, which was not specifically untouchability because untouchability is not defined. So, that was not specifically untouchability, rather, those activities were atrocities. So that is why the objective of the protection was broadened and Prevention of Atrocities Act was passed. And under this act, the specifically manual scavenging was prohibited and special courts were designed in order to have a speedy trial to punish, to take the punitive actions against those people who violate the provisions of this law. The third important legal safeguard is the Employment of Manual Scavengers and Construction of Dry Latrines Act, passed in 1993. Now, this act specifically deals with the domains of the manual scavenging and the dry latrines. And as per this act, manual scavenging again is prohibited in India. Insanitary latrines are not to be constructed. Manual cleaning of sewers without having the protective gear is prohibited. And last was the body established as National Commission for the Safai Karmachari. Now this commission was tasked to overall coordinate all the aspects which are associated with the prohibition of the manual scavenging. The main task of this body was to recommend various schemes, to study various schemes, to recommend certain changes in the laws which are dealing with all these things. However, the present status of this particular body is that presently it is a non-statutory body. Now this is very important. So these are the legal safeguards which are available in order to curb the menace of manual scavenging. Now we shall look at the existing challenges. Now first challenge is the caste based occupation, which we have already discussed, that this particular activity is mainly concerned with the Dalit population, and among the Dalits also the lowest subcaste group. So that is why all the socio-economic ramifications of this activity is restricted to this particular vulnerable section, which was already very vulnerable. So the point is that this caste-based occupation is further increasing the inequality in the society. The second challenge is the unclear data. Despite having so much of laws and the specific dedicated body to deal with this menace, the government still does not have a concrete data that how many manual scavengers still exist in India, what are the policy outcomes which are dealing with those manual scavengers, what are their health status. So no concrete data is available in the public domain regarding these things. Yes, certain NGOs and civil society organizations have come up with several data, and from different government service, we interpolate, we infer many things, but clear data regarding manual scavenging activity in India is not available. The third challenge is related to the technology. Now, the point is that there can be several pumping sets which can be deployed in order to clean the sewers. We can also use robotics, that is using the robots to clean the sewers. Then the protective gears which can be used in order to avoid any mishap. Now all these technological things are also lacking. Further, when we take the design of the sewers into account, now our sewers, for example, in cities like Mumbai and Delhi, the sewers were designed way back. And that is why the diameters, the size of those sewers were very small. But when we take today's conditions into account, with rise in the population, expansion in urbanization, and increase of waste generation, those sewers are not able to cope up with that amount of waste. And that is why those sewers are clogged up. And these clogged sewers are not easily cleaned by such machines, and that is why it becomes the harsh necessity that the humans have to enter those sewers. So again, the designing of this sewer is also one of the technological aspect which comes under town planning, and this aspect is very much ignored when we read about these things. The fourth important challenge is relation to the awareness. Still, we do not have the required awareness. We do not protest against these activities which is still going on in our country. Even the manual scavengers are not aware about the labor rights. For example, we discussed that without protective gears, the humans or the contractor cannot force the labor, the manual scavengers, to enter into a sewer. But the point is that those sections are so vulnerable that they cannot negotiate with the contractors. They are not aware about their labor rights. Civil society organizations are also not very much involved in this sector. Further, the biggest challenge associated is also the stigma which is attached to this particular activity. We do not consider this activity as purely economic in nature because we have discussed that it has a various other social aspects too. But because of these social aspects which are concerned with this activity, there is a huge social stigma associated also. So that is why these are the major challenges which are associated with the manual scavenging activity in India. Now, in this very regard, the action plan for the year 2020 to 2021 was brought up, and it gave multiple steps for the manual scavengers. This action plan was prepared by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, and these were the recommendations which were laid down under this plan. The first was the one-time cash assistance to the manual scavengers, which were expected to be identified. They should also be given the adequate skill development in order to work more efficiently, taking the health considerations too into account. Third was the capital subsidy for the self-employment projects. Fourth was the health come awareness camp because still people, manual scavengers, are not aware about the poisonous gases which get leaked in these sewers. And those gases are one of the prime reasons behind the death of the manual scavengers. Multiple workshops on prevention of hazardous cleaning were to be organized. Behavioral training, that is the upskilling program, will also be organized. Further, these subsidies were also given to the manual scavengers, sanitation workers who were involved in the hazardous cleaning, and their dependents also for the purchase of small machines for mechanized cleaning of the sewers and septic tanks. Further, the campaign to create the awareness about the MS Act 2013 self-employment scheme for the rehabilitation of manual scavengers and mechanized cleaning were the important pillars which were laid down under this action plan. Further, this action plan also recommended certain amendments which should be done in the Manual Scavenging Act 2013. Those recommendations were including the septage treatment plant and such other spaces emitting toxic gases or effluent in the definition of hazardous cleaning. The second was that the local authorities must be motivated and obliged to have a survey of the septic tanks in their respective jurisdictions to facilitate the effective supervision over the maintenance of those septic tanks. Further, these septic tanks must be designed as the prescribed specifications for the mechanized cleaning. More stringent penalties for engaging the persons to hazardous cleaning of sewers and septic tanks, and the compensation to the families of those manual scavengers who died while performing these activities must be given, and the amount should be respectable in a sense that it can support the family which is left behind. Further, a responsible sanitation authority and inspectors must be appointed for all these tasks. Local authorities must be charged with the responsibility for providing the service of mechanized cleaning of sewers or septic tanks, and state governments must provide the financial assistance to the local authorities required for mechanized cleaning of sewers and septic tanks. Now, all these things can be used by you in your mains answer as a way forward or the future strategy which India should take in order to eliminate this menace of manual scavenging.
This topic has appeared at page number 5 in today's The Hindu Delhi edition. The topic is in relation to the floods that has occurred in the river Godavari and has created a panic in that particular region. And this is the very context of this very news article. As far as the scheme of syllabus is concerned, this topic is mainly relevant in two papers, that is General Studies paper 1 as well as GS paper 3. In GS paper 1, we have a section of geography and a specific section of important geophysical phenomena. Similarly, in General Studies paper 3, we have a section of disaster management. And as we know that floods is an important geophysical phenomena as well as it is also a disaster and hence needs to be managed. So in this particular line, today's session will be dedicated to the reasons responsible for the floods as well as its prevention and management. Now, if you go by the previous year question paper analysis, the question said that differentiate the causes of landslides in Himalayan and the Western Ghats region. Despite the fact that this question is related to the landslides, but the underlying theme of this particular question is the difference in the factors responsible behind landslides in these two particular regions. Similarly, we are also aware about the fact that floods mainly occur in the perennial rivers, and that is the Himalayan rivers, or we can say the northern rivers. So what are those factors which are responsible for flooding situations in the northern India and similarly the flooding situations in the peninsular India? Now if you closely analyze this particular map, this is the flood zone of our country. And it is estimated that on an average every year 75 lakh hectares of land is affected by the floods, which lead to losses of around 2000 crores, and every year around 1600 lives are lost on account of flooding. As far as the region is concerned, again you can see here that the northern plains, that is the Satluj plains, Ganga plains as well as the Brahmaputra plains, they are most vulnerable to the flooding situations. However, in peninsular India also, we have certain patches which experience floods. For example, in this particular map, the eastern coast is shown as vulnerable area. Similarly, we are also aware about the fact of the floods on the western coast, that is the Maharashtra, state of Kerala, etc. So are the reasons responsible for the floods in the northern rivers as well as peninsular rivers are same, or are those reasons are different?
It might happen that certain regions are common to both these regions. It might also happen that there are some regions which are more dominated in particular area and the other regions are more dominated in some other area. So this is basically the theme of our today's session. Now, to understand the difference of regions in the Himalayan or the northern plain regions or the peninsular regions, we must first understand the basic difference of geology as well as the basic difference of rivers in the north as well as in the south of India. So now, as we all know that the Himalayas are made up of sedimentary rocks. These rocks are weaker in nature and hence they are highly prone to erosional activities. Similarly, the peninsular region, that is the Western Ghats, are hard rock system, and because of this fact their erosion is lesser in intensity. Even if you go by the geology of this peninsular rock, this is basically made up of igneous and basaltic materials. Again, igneous rocks are again hard and therefore there is a difficult erosion. Similarly, if you come to the rivers of the northern India, they are basically the perennial river system. The perennial river system means that throughout the year there is a water in them. And this water in these rivers are fed mainly by two sources. One is the glaciers of Himalayas and second is the monsoonal rainfalls. However, when it comes to the peninsular rivers, these rivers are seasonal in nature and they are mostly fed by the monsoon, that is the rainfall in this particular region. Yes, there are certain rivers, for example Kaveri in Tamil Nadu, which is fed by the monsoonal rainfall throughout the year. That is, the upper reaches of the Kaveri is fed by the southwest monsoon during summers and the lower reaches of Kaveri is fed by the northeast monsoon during winters. Okay, so the fact is we have to differentiate the geological factors as well as the characteristics of the rivers in these particular regions. This will in turn help us to understand that what are the different factors which operate in this particular region and what are those factors which are more dominated in this particular region. So now let us move ahead towards the analytical section. Now, as we have discussed that in the northern rivers, because they are deriving their water from the Himalayas and Himalayas are basically sedimentary rocks which are more prone to erosion, this means that the sediment load which these rivers are carrying with them will be very high. And these sediments will be deposited the river courses and hence the river will start meandering. For example, if the river is coming in such a fashion and it is eroding the mountains on the upper reaches, it is also bringing the sediments with them. And these sediments, suppose if get deposited over here, this river course gets blocked and hence it changes its direction, leading to the flooding of these areas. Otherwise, if there would not have been any deposition, this river would move straight. But now because of this deposition, the lateral movement of these rivers have caused the floods in the adjacent areas. So that is why the sedimentary nature of rocks becomes the important reason which is different from the Western Ghats. In line with this, if you closely understand the length of the rivers, that is the rivers like Ganga, Yamuna, Brahmaputra, they are one of the mightiest rivers of the world, not just India. And because they have a very long courses, hence their erosive capacity also increase. Because the longer courses allow the rivers to bring these sediments from a very huge area, and in turn this also increases the sediment load. But when you come to the Western Ghats rivers, these rivers have shorter courses. The third factor comes from the glaciers. Now, because we understand that the northern rivers are mostly fed by the Himalayan glaciers, so because of the climate change and resultant melting of these glaciers are also increasing the flood frequency as well as intensity in the northern plains. Then there are certain geophysical phenomena which are typically restricted to the upper reaches, that is the higher altitudes. For example, there are instances of GLOF, which is known as the glacial lake outburst floods. Then we also experience a number of cloudburst events in the Himalayas. So these factors also increase the discharge and the volume of the rivers. The fifth important factor is the monsoon. Now, because these northern plains, that is the Ganga and Brahmaputra plains, this entire northern plain stretch experiences the rainfall from both the branches, that is the Arabian Sea branch as well as the Bay of Bengal branch. And because they are experiencing the rainfall from both the areas, and hence again the river volume, the water volume in those river basins, they increase. Then if you closely analyze the socio-economic status of these particular regions, they are very densely populated areas, and this becomes the another important reason. Now, because these regions are densely populated and they are heavily dependent on the agricultural practices, because of high demographic load, there is a huge encroachment of the land. The floodplains are also encroached and the wetlands are also encroached, and this in turn reduces the carrying capacity of the river basin. For example, let's say that earlier the river was flowing in this particular path and the areas along the river banks were vacant. So let's assume that if the flooding situation starts, this river was having a space in its lateral side which can store the excess water. But now, because of very high demographic load, these areas are occupied by the habitants of that particular region. These areas are used for agriculture. These areas are sometimes also used for construction activities. So the total area which could have subsumed the excessive water is reduced to this narrow belt. And that is why whenever there is an excess water in this river course, when it gets spilled, there is no area to store it, and hence the flood situation, the intensity of the floods increases in these particular areas. So these are some of the reasons which are most dominant in the Himalayan areas. But now the question arises, we have discussed that the peninsular rivers are shorter in nature. So what does exactly happen? We also know the fact that the geology of the peninsular area is very hard, and hence there will be lesser intensity of erosion. So what exactly happens in the peninsula? In peninsula, now we know that because there are hard rock structure, and these hard rock does not allow the vertical erosion. Now because rivers are not eroding the rocks vertically, and hence the depth of the river course will be very shallow. And if the river course is very shallow, then obviously if there is an increase in amount of the water, that basin or that course will not be able to absorb that water, and hence because of this shallow nature of the river course, the water will spill in the lateral directions. So now if we understand that hard rocks, if are reducing the intensity of the erosion, it is also reducing the vertical erosion and hence leading to the shallow depth of the river courses. The second important factor is the steep slopes of the Western Ghats. Now because the Western Ghats slopes are excessively steep, and hence whenever the river moves downwards from these excessive steep slopes, there is a very high velocity, and as soon as these rivers hit the plain area, there is a sudden break in the slope, and hence the river, which upon reaching the peninsular area, it spills its water in the lateral direction. The third important factor is because these Western Ghats are located perpendicular to the Arabian Sea, and hence the rainfall is also very high in this particular area. The intensity of rainfall is very high, and because of this high intensity of rainfall, the erosion increases, and there are also the events of landslides. And because of these landslides, there is excessive deposition of the sediments on the river course, and the same phenomena takes place which was there in the rivers of the northern plains, right? Then there are other anthropogenic activities also. For example, deforestation. Similarly, dam mismanagement. For example, one of the major factors behind the Kerala floods of 2018 was the dam mismanagement. Now let us understand that how dam mismanagement leads to flooding situation. For example, here we are having a reservoir, Here we are having a dam which is built, and this is the downstream area of the dam. The reservoir is obviously filled with water up to its maximum level. That means, first of all, this area, that is the upstream area, is always flooded because of the presence of reservoir and the storage of water which takes place in that reservoir. That means that the dams lead to flooding in the upstream areas. Now let us imagine that the rainfall is taking place in this area, and that is why the water levels of the reservoir is increasing. Now what needs to be done? Before every monsoon, the gates of this dam must be opened so that this excess water can flow towards the downstream areas. But because we don't have very intelligent decision making systems, and that is why many a times it happens that the gates are not opened on time. Moreover, there is also a dichotomy between the policy goals. That is, if you need to support the agriculture, you must have excess water which can be provided for the irrigation facilities. So that means that the water must be stored in the reservoirs. On the other hand, we also face a situation that if the water level increases beyond certain limit, then we have to release this water. So when there is a sudden release of water, the kinetic energy of that water is very high. And this untimely fast flowing water, when reaches to the downstream plain areas, because of its very high momentum, it again spills in the different directions, leading to the flooding again and now in the downstream areas. So that is what exactly happened in Kerala also. So now the objective of this discussion is again that you should be able to differentiate that which factors are more dominant in the northern rivers. So that is why the basic idea behind this discussion is that you should be aware that what are the dominant factors which operate in the northern rivers and which are those dominant factors which operate in the peninsular rivers. Obviously, again, there will be some reasons which will be common to both of these. For example, deforestation is the common factor, increasing construction activities, encroachment of the wetlands and floodplains areas, they are common to both the regions. But then there are certain differences in the nature and characteristics of the river as well as of the geology of these areas. And because of the difference in these characteristics, the dominant reasons of the floods in both these regions also differ. So I hope that you have understood this point. Now comes to the management and the prevention or the control of these floods. Now the management and the prevention strategies for floods was discussed in the DNS of 22nd June 2022. In this DNS, we discussed that what are the specific reasons behind the floods of the Assam. And in this very line, we also discussed the management and prevention strategies. So for this, you can refer to the DNS dated 22nd June 2022. So now let us revise this topic in the textual format also. First, the dominant factors responsible for the flooding in the Himalayan rivers. First, we have discussed the long courses of the rivers and the youth stages of the rivers. This increase the erosive capacity of the northern plain rivers. Second, the weaker nature of the Himalayan rocks also increase the sediment loads which these rivers carry with them. Third, because these rivers are fed by the glaciers and hence glacial melting increase the flood risk. Then we also discussed the geophysical phenomena, for example the cloudburst as well as the glob phenomena increase the intensity of the rainfalls as well as the discharge of the waters in these rivers. Then we also know that because the northern plain rivers have very huge tributary network and hence ultimately, for example in the river of Ganga, the water is coming from a large number of tributaries and hence the Ganga in its later stage is accumulating a lot of volume of water which increases the flood levels. Then also we have discussed this monsoonal fact because the northern plains are getting the monsoon from Arabian Sea as well as the Bay of Bengal branch. Then this point is also important. In the lower areas of Bihar as well as West Bengal, there is a meander intersection also. Meander intersection means, for example, the river is going and taking this meandering path. Eventually what will happen, this loop will become more sinus and this will become like this. And then a time might come when the meanders of these rivers and this rivers might intersect, deviating the flow of water in either direction. And this in turn can make new areas more vulnerable to floods. The last factor we have discussed the high demographic load along the banks of the northern rivers. Similarly, the factors in the peninsular rivers are first because we have hard geological system which does not allow the vertical erosion and hence leads to shallow depth of river courses which cannot store enough water. Next, because of the perpendicular location of the Western Ghats to the Arabian Sea monsoonal branch, there is a very high intense rainfall. Next, the excessive steep slopes of the Western Ghats increase the kinetic energy of the rivers, and as soon as those rivers hit the plain areas, the plain topography, the water spills in the lateral direction. Deforestation, soil erosion, and floodplain encroachment activities further increase the flood proneness of these areas. We have also discussed the particular issue of dam mismanagement. And yes, this factor is also very important because the eastern coasts are very vulnerable to the cyclonic rainfall. And hence, it also happens that at the mouth of these rivers, that is the extreme lower reaches of these rivers, when experience tropical cyclones, again because there is a high intensity of rainfall in this particular area, and that is why the rivers get flooded in this area. So these are all the factors which are dominant in these two regions and hence will help you to write an answer on this particular theme. This topic has appeared as the lead article in today's The Hindu Daily edition at page number 6, and the topic is in relation to the right to privacy, one of the fundamental rights under Article 21, that is right to dignified life. And as we all know that in Justice K.S. Puttaswamy's case, the Supreme Court has provided the right to privacy as an integral part of right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. However, this article is analytical in nature. Broadly, it talks about the performance in the present day context. It talks about that is the government really able to enforce the right to privacy, or there are certain government policies or schemes which on the contrary infringe the right to privacy of the Indian citizens. The immediate context of this very opinion is the withdrawal of the Personal Data Protection Bill, and this forms the very context of this news article. This is an opinionated article where the author says that this particular right to privacy has not been implemented in the letter and spirit, and therefore it transgresses the privacy rights of the Indian people. It says that withdrawal of the Personal Data Protection Bill by the government has done more harm as the privacy rights are still beyond the regulations despite Justice Sri Krishna Committee report. And because now the Data Protection Bill has been withdrawn rather than reforming it, so the public data remain vulnerable at the hands of multinational companies and the digital giants. So that is exactly the point of today's discussion. Here we can see that in Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India case, Supreme Court said that right to privacy is an integral part under Article 21. The court held that these rights are recognized by the Constitution, but along with this, the Supreme Court also said that right to privacy is not absolute in nature and therefore the state can make certain laws to restrict the right to privacy. But these laws must fulfill threefold requirement. First is the legality, which says that yes, the state can make certain provisions which can restrict the right to privacy, but that must be backed by the legislative power. That must have the legislative mandate, which means that it must be in the form of law and not just an executive order. The second important parameter is that there should be an exact objective stated aim of the law. There must be the legitimate state purpose. And third is the element of proportionality, which ensures a rational nexus between the objects and the means adopted to achieve them. But again, as we have discussed in the beginning, that recently, if we analyze the present context, certain government schemes or the steps which are taken by the executive or the legislature, the author believes that the right to life and personal liberty is not being properly implemented. It provides us certain examples and data also. First, it says that there have been a gross misuse of important data. For example, Aadhaar details, bank account number, phone number, residential address, etc. Sometimes you might have felt that you just talk about certain phone with your friend, and the moment you scroll down your YouTube or you open your Google Chrome browser, there appears certain ads related to certain smartphones, or you talk about certain ACs, or you talk about anything, and the next moment or later there are certain advertisements which are across all your social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, etc. So the question sometimes arises that how this is spying even on our talks. So this is what exactly it means, that there has been a gross misuse of important data. Second is the unregulated sharing of important and sensitive data, which in turn increases the chances of cyber crime such as phishing attacks, financial scams aided by the attackers, access to personal information, etc. Third, this topic was very much in news, that is the Pegasus software, which was alleged to have been used by the Indian government, which has resulted in spying against the intellectuals, political opponents, lawyers, etc. Next is the collection of the personal details by VPN service providers as part of the KYC record further increases the risk of personal data theft and cyber attacks. And the last but not the least comes the argument or the ground of national security. Sharing of the personal information with the grounds of national security further raises the question on unregulated state surveillance on its own citizens. So these are some of the concerns, some sectors whereby there have been a gross misuse of data. The data are being misused to fulfill the personal motives and interests, and thereby it constitutes a gross violation of the right to privacy as said by the Supreme Court, or as given by the Supreme Court within the ambit of Article 21. And in that very case, there was an important argument by the Attorney General. He said that right of privacy may at best be a common law right but not a fundamental right. 5 years later, it can be said that Puttaswamy judgment has missed the mark for the objective that was sought to be achieved. So again, this is an opinionated article, and these are just the opinions of this particular author. However, this article will help you to critically analyze when you are asked to discuss that whether that particular right is being implemented in letter and spirit in today's time or not. Or you can also be asked that how far do you agree, or how far the progress has been made in this particular regard. So now is the time for the reference article. This article has appeared at page number 6, and it appears as today's lead article in the Hindu Delhi edition. The article reads, "The draconian law that needs to disappear." This article is in the context of APSPA, which stands for the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Now this topic is very important. It has regularly appeared in civil service examinations. Moreover, it has regularly appeared in our DNS also. So that is why, to understand all the associated dimensions, you can refer to the DNS dated 23rd February 2022, whereby Mangal sir had discussed all the important dimensions of the issues related to the AFSPA. What powers under this act are given to the center or the state governments? What was the objective of AFSPA? What is the current status of the AFSPA in the northeastern states? Moreover, there is a separate discussion between Nagendra sir as well as Mangal sir on the topic AFSPA. This discussion is also available on our YouTube channel, and this discussion is dated 16th December 2021. So, from both these sources, you will gain an important insight related to this particular law and the dimensions associated as well as the issues associated with it. So that is why you are requested to go back to the DNS dated 23rd February 2022 in order to understand this topic holistically. Now is the time for the question of the day. The question from yesterday's DNS is in front of you, and it's related to the refugees. The question was having two statements. Statement 1 was, in India, The asylum seekers arriving from the neighboring countries, including Myanmar, are required to approach UNHCR for determination of the status. Statement 2 is principle of non-refoulement is part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Among these two statements, you are to find the correct statement. Both of these statements are incorrect, and that is why option D, that is neither 1 nor 2, is the correct answer. The question from today's DNS is, KS Puttaswamy judgment deals with which of the following rights? A. Right to health. B. Right to environment. C. Right to privacy. Or D. Right to equality. So that's all for today. All the very best and study hard.